Hello and welcome to Talking Leadership. This is Eric Perez with you for another leadership podcast. Thank you for joining me once again. And I have the great pleasure of being joined by another fantastic guest. And I'll provide you with a background to today's podcast guest. She is currently a lecturer at the University of the Sunshine Coast. And in addition to that role, she is also a social media coach, delivering coaching and workshops, as well as the author of a recently released publication entitled Public Relations and Strategic Communications. That was co-authored with Saira Ali and Umi Kitab. Can I welcome to the podcast Dr. Karen Sutherland? How are you, Karen?
Well, thanks. How are you?
I'm fantastic, mate. Thank you for joining me. So I'll start us off where I typically start us off with these podcasts in asking, in which industry was your first leadership role and why did you take that on, Karen?
All right. So I think really my first official leadership role was at Monash University, and I was appointed as the college head of a brand new hall that housed 300 students. And I had a team of 15 student volunteers and 3 staff members. So that was probably my first official role. And I took that because I'd been a deputy college head. So I wasn't I was in semi-leadership. I was second in charge, but this was my baby, really. So I was offered that role. It was a huge opportunity and I didn't have much experience, but I took it on as a challenge.
Oh, good. Fantastic. And so, just as an aside before we go into the questions a little further, I note that you're now lecturing. How did you make the transition from that role to lecturing? Was that a linear pathway, or did it?
I was actually doing both at the same time. So
okay, yep.
Yeah. So before I actually worked in academia, I worked in industry, in marketing, communications, and public relations for probably about 12 years. And then, and I was still sort of studying during that time. And then a job came up at a campus where I had previously been the marketing manager. A lecturing role came up and they needed someone quickly. And luckily I was available. And then it just went from there. And so I knew people who also took the sort of residential roles on campus in the colleges, and first applied for a deputy college head role, and I got that. And then, it was just a progression from there. When they started to build new halls, they put a call out for college heads, and I applied, and I was luckily got it. So when I was doing that, I was doing my PhD, I was lecturing, and I was the college head.
Oh, wow. So no time for sleep then, I guess.
No, not much. Not much.
Fair enough. So let me ask the next question, a series of questions I've got here, which is around, in your experience, do you find that there's a difference between this leadership concept and management?
Yeah, look, I think they feed off each other. I think leadership is more about, I guess, just sort of being an example and developing a positive culture. I think the management side is more about the operational sort of project management, organisational stuff. But I think leadership is really about people, and I see management as sort of the organisation of tasks and things like that. So I think they are different, but I think they impact each other.
Okay, yeah, and I see that's a kind of like on a continuum there. One influences the other. Okay, so let me ask a question around your leadership style and your approach. And in that, leaders sometimes make mistakes. So how do you engage with an error or a mistake that's attributed to your leadership?
Well, first of all, I listen to the people that it's impacted, because generally when I make a mistake, it's affected the people I'm working with. I listen to their experience of it, and then I try and dissect what happened and come up with solutions to try and prevent it happening in the future, and then also run it by the people who are involved as well, and then just keep trying to improve and implement those changes, and then also monitor how they go, because I think you need to keep assessing and improving as you go.
Oh, that's excellent. And that's a little bit of an extension onto some of the responses I've had before. Not that my previous guests haven't done that sort of tracking afterwards, but just to unpack that a little bit, do you find in your travels that error making, and this can be at various different levels, is an opportunity to learn, as well as potentially not being just a negative in workspace?
Totally. I think, and sometimes you don't know that there are sort of deficiencies in your processes and things like that until you make a mistake. You don't know it, you're unaware. So I think it is definitely an opportunity to learn. And I think I think it's an opportunity to, you as a leader, you need to take responsibility and apologize when you muck up as well. So I think that's really important to do with your team too. So yeah, I don't think it's always a negative. I think it's always an opportunity to just keep growing and improving.
For sure. So again, and not to harp on the negative sides of leadership, but what do you find is the most difficult part about being a leader, Karen?
Well, I think initially for me it was realizing that you can be friendly with the people that you work with, but you're the leader and you have to lead by example, and you can't be really buddy. There's a difference. You can have a positive working relationship with people, but I really struggled with that in my first leadership role, because I was trying to be friends rather than actually being a good leader. And, I think, sometimes you can have both, but I think you need to be fair in all aspects. And just because you get along with someone, some of your staff better than others, doesn't mean you should show them any preference, if you know what I mean. Like, you've got to be fair and take your own sort of, personal, I'm trying to think of the word, like your personal preferences out of it, and just, lead by example and be fair to everyone and do the best for the team and the culture.
Thank you for sharing that. That's and I can say this quite freely because I've not heard it brought up in previous podcasts, but this idea about a few degrees of separation between yourself and those that you lead is interesting to me. And I think you've covered any questions I might have come up with that, because it's not about not being open and having a dialogue with the people you work with, but I guess if I'm hearing you right, it's not to be seen to be favouring one person or group over another, because you might have more of an affinity with one person or a group of people than others, when the whole group is under your leadership in any given situation in the organisation. So that's it's quite interesting. I haven't come across that a lot, but I understand what you're saying, because it can undermine your authority if you're trying to do something to push the place forward and you're worried about how it might affect friendships rather than being able to do the job in a objective way. Is that kind of
and when with my first experience as like leading the team at the hall where I worked at Monash Uni, I wanted, because it was a brand new workplace, really, I wanted to be liked more than what was actually the best way to, the best sort of vision to make. I can't speak very well today. It was the actually implementing my vision sort of went by the wayside a little bit at first, because I wanted to be liked, because not everyone agreed with it. But in the outset, when I got back on track, everyone was happy with the results. But yeah, it was just that initial wanting to be liked. I had to just sort of throw that out. And I find that you want to be looked up to. It's better to be looked up to as a strong leader than to be liked as a friend who does favors. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. And I'm assuming here that you're not the only one that's gone through that, and I've got any number of stories from friends that have been through that as well, trying to be a best mate rather than being a good manager or a good leader in an organizational setting. And you have to wait until the proverbial hits the fan before you realize that maybe that's not the best way to conduct yourself. But then I've had some people on the podcast saying that when you're dealing with people in the leadership setting, that the job is about relationship building and doing that. So some would argue differently, that you need to create those friendships to be good leaders. And I think one thing that's missed in these conversations from what I've been hearing is that context plays a big role in that, because in small organizations where you've got small teams, that degree of and I use this word in a professional setting, the intimacy across the friendships and the professional relationships that are developed in small teams can be quite strong and quite pointed, versus big organizations where there are lots of layers between you as the leader and those that are doing the work in that organization. So you've got levels of management and other leaders to do that kind of work. So the degree of separation gets a lot bigger, I think, given the size of the organization. At least that's been my experience. It may not be a for everybody.
And I also agree that relationships are hugely important. Hugely important. I'm not saying be cold by any means. I'm saying you can definitely be friendly and have great working relationships, but it's when that sort of line crosses between being friends and having that working relationship, that's something you need to be wary of as a leader.
Yeah, no, I'm hearing you on that quite loud and clear. So let me ask you something more on a positive note. How do you measure success as a leader, Karen?
Well, I mean, really, it's really how well my team is functioning, how happy they are, and how well they're producing, and if we're talking about, say, like in my role now, it's really how happy the students are, who are really my customers. So if my teaching team is happy and they're doing a great job, then the students will be doing well and will be happy as well. So that's really how I measure it. It's just how happy people are interacting and collaborating in that space.
Yeah, I see, and that again will depend on the context. So the uni context, I can see that. So look, let me. I've got some phrases, some statements here that I put to people in the podcast. So let me ask you the first one. What's your view on the job experience develops better leaders? What's your view on that?
Look, I think, well, to tell you the truth, that first year I gained a lot of experience, but geez, I made a lot of mistakes. I was not a very good leader at all. I had to learn by my mistakes, and I think I put my team through a lot of stuff that they, if I had been better experienced, they wouldn't have had to go through, because they had to learn because I had to learn, if you know what I mean. So I think that you can. I think I would have performed probably better if I had a stronger mentor around how to be a leader and how to do that. I didn't have, I didn't really have a close mentor that I could bounce things off as much as I wanted. There was a staff member there, but they were the mentors who, 10 different people. So it was really hard to have that level of support. And that's no criticism of Monash Uni at all. That's just the the reality of it. And I think being a brand new leader, I probably needed a lot more support than most. So so I think you can, but I think you need a range of things to support you.
Yeah, and look, thank you for sharing that. And it takes a fair bit of courage to admit when those first leadership roles don't go exactly the way that you want them to. And I have to put my hand up. My first roles, I had some very big errors on my part that I learnt from and were completely attributable to me, not because I couldn't do the work. Is that sometimes you just take a punt on something and it doesn't work out, and you've got to be able to deal with the fallout of that and own those things as they come along, particularly as a leader in your in those formative stages, because I think we all go through different learnings as you progress as a leader and you get experience over time. At least that's my experience of it. Some may find that that's not the case at all, and I'm sure you've met, and I know that I've met people that get into leadership roles and don't ever take a backward step, but I'm sure at some point in their learning they've made those mistakes. But that's part of the learning process. Nobody gets this thing right from the start, and that's I think what I'm drawing from people like yourself and others that are prepared to share this stuff. So let me ask you, beyond experience, do you think formal education helps to develop better leaders?
Look, I think you need, I'm a big believer of, look, I work at a university, but I'm a big believer that you have to practically apply what you're learning. So if you're studying management, you need to practically apply that for it to really have any meaning. There's a great quote, and I forget, it was some Swami said it. I'm into yoga. But anyway, they said that it's wisdom. No, you can have knowledge, but it doesn't become wisdom until it's actually experienced. So you need to be able to apply what you learn. So I think you need both. So I think you need that. It'd be great to be able to be, say, a new manager and have some the training just before you go in, or you continue your education in management while you're actually a manager. So you can actually really practically apply what you're learning and the techniques that you're learning. I think it has a lot more meaning when you do it that way.
Well, thank you for sharing that. So here's one that here's a statement that I love asking, this particular one, because it draws out quite some different views here. But what's your views on leaders are born, not made? I think they can be born, they can be made. So, I don't think it's that black and white. So I think some people, they from a young age, they may have like a large family, or they may be put in positions from a very young age where they show leadership abilities, and then they're developed over time. But yeah, I never thought I was a leader at all, and I went into that first role and I was not a great leader, but now I feel like I'm a pretty good leader. I have a strong team, and they're happy, and things seem to be ticking along, and I keep learning all the time. And I think one of the big things I learned was to be a leader that I would want to have, and that's what sort of kept me going. So I think it can be both. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's a nice way to put that. What is the kind of leader you would want to have, and if you can emulate that, then you're 90% there to doing the things that you say. Having a happy team and a productive workplace. So again, appreciate your views on that. So the following is more to help me out a little bit, and I've asked this again in every podcast around your thoughts on strategic thinking and foresight. And why I asked that is, part of my studies, I'm looking at these two things as key leader capabilities. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on, firstly, strategic thinking as a leader capability, and foresight. So do you have any views you can share on that, Karen?
Well, I think, I think strategic thinking it's not just relevant but vital. And I think as an employee, I need to see what the goals are of my organisation, and then I have to, my leadership has to support that. So I have to think strategically in that sense to make sure that what I'm doing is actually supporting the goals of the organisation. And in terms of, what was the other one? Forward thinking?
Foresight.
Yeah, you can only have that so much. You can only, we're not Nostradamus, but it's good to see, keep on top of things that you're hearing that may affect your industry, and just start to think ahead around what, you may need to do to adapt to that. Because I think one of the key things for any sort of business or any leader is you need to be adaptable. and quite nimble too. So I think it's good to have a vision, but you also need to be able to adapt to your environment too.
Yeah, and again, thank you for sharing that. And with leader capabilities, some have argued, and I understand why you might say this, is that communications is critical as well, and there are other leadership capabilities that might come into that space. And we could spend hours talking about the different capabilities that people think are essential in their leaders. But the reason for me asking this is as part of my studies, and you'll understand this, is you have to limit what you're doing, because you'd never get your study done if you tried to look into everything in any given topic area.
Yeah.
And from the literature that I'm reading, it's screaming quite strongly that strategic thinking is a critical leader capability, irrespective of whatever.
Well, and that underpins everything. It underpins your communication, it underpins your relationship management, and like strategic thinking is around, really underpins everything that you're doing. So making sure that you have a goal, an objective, and then that's, what drives all your actions as a leader.
Yeah, and that's definitely coming from someone who's lived that. So, okay, so to end the podcast, and here's one that might be tricky, but you've given some insights already in some of your responses. What might you say to a younger version of yourself, Karen, about being an effective leader?
Well, similar to what I said before, be the leader that you wish you had, or that you want to have, and realize that, you need to lead by example. You can't expect people to act a particular way when you're not doing it yourself. So you need to be the example. And that's the thing that I really had to learn. And I find now, and I use that approach even with my lecturing, because I teach students about, say, public relations and things like that, and we focus on that relationship building. And so I treat my students that way. I treat them as my customers and things like that, so that they understand what it actually means and what that looks like. So then they can, join the dots when they have to do it themselves. So yeah, that would be my key one, is you need to actually lead by example and keep self-reflecting, because it's really important.
That's excellent, Karen, and I appreciate your time, and thank you for ending that on a positive note. So for the listeners, I've been speaking to Dr. Karen Sutherland, and again, as a thank you for coming onto the podcast, I'd just like to give you a few seconds to plug your book for those that are listening.
Oh, great. Thanks. So we just have a book that's just come out through Oxford University Press called Public Relations and Strategic Communication. So that's available now. And I also have another book coming out next year called Strategic Social Media Management, Advertising, Marketing and PR. And
for those that are studying in that area, please get onto those books. And if you want to know more about learning in that area, you can get in contact with Dr. Karen Sutherland at the University of the Sunshine Coast. And again, Karen, thank you for your time. And for those listening, this has been Talking Leadership with me, Eric Perez. And just to finish off, and again, as a big thank you to the podcast sponsor, I'd again like to thank Sydney Fish Markets for their support of me and getting this podcast out and helping to develop some great conversations with leaders. So if you're in Sydney and you want to sample some of the best seafood, not only from New South Wales, but from around the country, get to the Sydney Fish Markets. And again, thank you to everyone, and I'll catch you all on the next podcast. Thanks again, Karen.
Thanks.